like 5 or 6 species when we went to Tinley, and we kind of were like, well, that escalated very quickly.
This podcast features Caitlin Edenfield from the Reptiles of Eden. Today's topics include their origin story, all about the geckos, snakes, and yes, even mammals they breed, and her perfect reptile show from a vendor's perspective. I've known Caitlin for many years. I've also purchased several pets from the Reptiles of Eden, mostly New Caledonia species, including the B. robusta gecko since we recorded this podcast. I stop by their booth every month at the Medina show, and it took some convincing to get her on the live show. Several months. Okay, full disclosure, I had to buy a hedgehog in its enclosure. Nonetheless, I've got to know Caitlin and Reptiles of Eden even better, as I'm sure you will. Roll the music. Welcome to the Reptile Show Reporter Podcast. Today I have Caitlin, Reptiles of Eden. How are you doing, Caitlin?
I'm doing good.
Great. Excellent. Thanks for coming on. I know that before we had you I agreed to purchase a hedgehog as part of getting you on the live podcast. Thanks for not asking me to buy anything else for this. I really appreciate you being here. And so thank you once again. What type of things do you sell?
We sell all kinds of different species of geckos. Mostly, we breed 19 different species of geckos, and then 2 mammals, and then hognose snakes.
Oh, wow. Hognose snake too. Is that new?
We tried to breed them last year and got 1 egg, and this season we're doing better. So,
That's awesome.
yes.
That's awesome
Yeah.
to hear that. But, I mean, you have the New Caledonia geckos. I have a crested from you from many years ago, a couple of chihuahuas, and a Urodactylis velarde. Those are so. Do you have any others of the New Caledonia type?
Yeah, the other New Caledonias we have that you don't have is the gargoyle geckos, and then we have Bavia robusta, which are very tiny. They're about the size of your Urodactylodes, but they're super fast and kind of look like morning geckos.
Yipes! So super fast.
Yes.
The velarde aren't very fast. They just sit on your finger
No.
and hold on for dear life. But super fast is not good because the cresteds always jump and they're fast and they seem to run. The chihuahuas seem to be very uh, reasonable, although they do sometimes bite. I stuck my finger in the cage one day to change out the food. I didn't see where he was at, and he actually bit me because I was taking his old food and putting the new food in there. And he didn't cause any harm, but boy, it was very surprising to be bitten by a chihuahua gecko. But nonetheless,
Oh yeah.
okay. So tell me about Reptiles of Eden. How did it start, and who's part of the Reptiles of Eden?
Well, it's my husband and I. That's it. And we started it. We got our first gecko before we got married, and then we got a couple more geckos, and then we decided to start to breed them, and then we realized, crap, what are we going to do with all these babies? And that's when we decided to actually make a business of it. And I think it took us about a year after we actually started breeding to go to our first expo before anything really happened, where we finally got our LLC and all the licensing and stuff so that we could actually sell them. So,
all right. So tell me about this. So you guys made a commitment to an animal first. Was that your first commitment before you got married, or did you know you were going to get married at the time, or what happened there?
well, I knew I was going to get married. I don't know if he knew that we were going to get married
on board yet, but okay.
But yeah, we got. I actually no, we weren't engaged yet, but we were already working at the pet store together, so we went to an expo together and we decided to buy a gecko there. And his parents, I remember, because he was living at his parents' house, weren't really excited about having this gecko at their house at the time. And my parents said I couldn't have it at our house. So he ended up with it until we finally got married and moved in together.
So what kind of gecko was it?
It was a crested gecko.
Crested gecko. Okay.
Yeah.
So it all started off with that. My first gecko from you guys was a crested that we got from my middle child. And we still I'm still feeding the gecko, although she's still in college now. So I guess that's the the scenario. They go to college and leave the reptiles to me, and I take care of them. But it's always fun. It's always great to have. But she comes home and takes care of him from time to time. So okay. So how did you get the name Reptiles of Eden?
So our last name's Edenfield, and Alan jokes that people call us Edenfield all the time, like 90% of people do. So we kind of went with that, and then we're both Christians, and so we wanted to try to have some sort of tie-in with that, so that we came up with, instead of like the Garden of Eden, it's the Reptiles of Eden.
Okay, but then you moved into mammals. Um, so uh, so
Yes, yeah, we got the mammals later
but
on. So
but as we say with the show, the live and what have you, reptile show doesn't mean just reptiles. It means mammals. It means snakes. It means what other kind of things? So you see a whole
there's
bunch
birds.
of birds. You see all kinds of stuff. I guess we don't really see much in the way of fish. We see salamanders and frogs, which are a different group as well. So that covers the whole
Yeah.
thing. So that's why we didn't name this the all animal show reporter. We named it Reptile because everybody knows what a reptile show is. So that's
Yes.
great. Okay, excellent. So you started that way. You started with some gecko, a crested gecko. You started breeding geckos. How did you decide to go to a reptile show?
We had actually the All Ohio Reptile Show. It was back in it was in the other facility that was very small, and so they wouldn't allow extra vendors, and they happened to move over to the state fairground or Franklin County Fairgrounds,
Mhm.
and they had room for tables. And so there was a lady, Bonnie, there that we had sold a blue tongue skink to. And she said, "Oh, I can talk to Shay, who's the owner of the show, and I can get you in." And so we happened to she was like, "Yeah, I'll tell Shay." And then all of a sudden, it was the next month we were in the show, and then we vended every single month since that
Wow.
day.
So
Yeah.
you vend at the All Ohio show. You vend at the one that I've seen you most at, the All Cleveland show, which is still now down in Medina since it changed. Any other shows that you go to?
And then we do the Sin City show every month too.
All right. Is
Yeah.
that but the first two are run by the same group? The Sin City show, is that run by them or is that outside of there?
That's John Chosmer and Derek Burnett. So
Okay.
two snake breeders.
Okay, there you go. Well,
Yeah.
snakes are what you most commonly see at these most of these shows, but at least all the Ohio shows seem to have a lot of snakes there, a lot of ball
Yes.
pythons, but but you don't carry those. You have geckos. That's a great thing. So
Yes.
and now so you have hedgehogs, and what's the other mammal that you have?
We have lesser tenrecs.
All right, lesser tenrecs. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into hedgehogs and tenrecs?
So it actually started with me getting into sugar gliders to begin
Mhm.
with.
Okay.
And I had sugar gliders, and I went, I don't want to breed these because 90% of people will probably take care of them incorrectly because you have to cook for them and everything every
Mhm.
single night. They're almost like little monkeys.
Mhm.
So I love mammals. I had tons of mammals growing up, and I wanted some sort of mammal that I could work with. So a breeder friend of ours, she did hedgehogs, pedigreed hedgehogs, and so I ended up getting just a pair from her to see if I liked it, if I liked the animal and stuff. And so I got them and I played around with them for about 6 months, and I went, yeah, these are very low maintenance, not too hard to care for, pretty friendly things. So we got those. So yeah, hedgehogs are nocturnal, pretty much like half your reptile species too. Um, and they are very similar to any of like your small animals, but again on the nocturnal spectrum. And then they go into a pretty decent size enclosure. They should be in a 24 by 36. We usually put them in a 24 by like 42 or
Mhm.
something a little bit bigger than that. And then they should have a wheel to run on. They can run miles each night, so they they need that wheel. Um, We usually do there's a Carolina Storm wheel, which is the wheel that comes in the setup. And that wheel is very silent. It has a hockey wheel that actually is what turns it instead of the squeaky metal gears and stuff. So it makes it very nice so that you don't hear a little squeaking every 5 seconds of the animal running. Um, and then those guys, hedgehogs need heat, so they need to be kept around like 75. We usually set their thermostats to 77 just to be safe because around 72 to like 78, 79 is fine. At 80 degrees, they're going to get a little bit warm and kind of do what we call a sploot, where they'll kind of lay out trying to get cooler. So, if you ever see your hedgehog completely unballed with his belly on the ground, probably a little too warm. Yes, yes. And then they're insectivores, but they usually, some people will feed them dry cat food. We feed them a diet called Hedgehog Precision, which has black soldier fly larva as the main ingredient. It's a little bit closer to their normal diet. Some of the cat foods can give them diarrhea, and the Hedgehog Precision doesn't really do that. So that's what we do. It might be a tiny bit more pricey, but I say it's worth it.
So you sell them with the whole cage and everything included. What
Yep.
made that happen?
Well, a lot of stuff, specifically hedgehogs, need heat, and people don't really understand that. Like they can go into hibernation if it gets too cold, and if they go into hibernation, they don't wake up from it. It's like the end all be all for them. So the biggest thing is we wanted to sell something with a heat source and thermostat and stuff so that people that maybe were, knew what rabbits and guinea pigs and stuff like that were and wanted another small animal but didn't really understand the heat aspect, got all of the stuff they needed so that they correctly started the animal off right. And at the reptile shows, you can't usually find cages and stuff, whereas everyone sells exoterras and reptibreezes and all those, so you can usually find the things to set up a reptile, or people have the tank already set up, versus the hedgehogs, they don't really have an enclosure that might fit the hedgehog. So we decided to do more of a full setup for those guys.
That's great. No, it was perfect. I got home, I took a nap, my daughter set it up, I put the heating panel in it, and we were good to go. Better than
Yeah.
any other last minute purchase or decision at the show.
Yes.
Because I usually end up coming home and figuring something out because I got a lot of cages, but that was really easy. So tell us about the Tenrix. What is a Tenric, and what does it look like?
So Tenrics are very similar to, they kind of look like hedgehogs. They're not related to them at all. They look more like, they have more of like a shrew face. So they kind of have a longer nose, and they don't have a lot of hair like your hedgehogs. And then they're small. They fit in like the palm of your hand. And then they are semi-arboreal. So they love to climb and hang out on bridges and hammocks, and they'll climb the side of the cage and climb upside down. But the cool thing about them, they're insectivores, so they pretty much eat only insects, whereas like your hedgehogs will eat kibble and insects. And then they have more of you can go completely bioactive with them. Like our enclosure has bioactive soil with live snake plants and all kinds of vines and stuff for them to go onto. So they're more easier for a reptile keeper to kind of understand their habitat, because you could put them in a 40-gallon breeder tank and deck it out with all kinds of climbing stuff, and they'd be just super happy. And then they have a long lifespan. A lot of your small animals, like your hedgehogs, are 7 to 9 years. Rats are 3 to 4. Rabbits you might get 10 to 15 years out of. But lesser tenrecs usually live about 15 years and don't usually have a ton of health issues. And then they're very slow moving, kind of like a sloth. Like they kind of just grab onto you and then they just kind of chill there. And then and their quills aren't super sharp. Like the hedgehog's quills, it's like, their quills are very kind of fake like they look really sharp, but you touch them and they're very soft. They're like a hairbrush. So you don't really, they kind of are a copycat of the hedgehog. They want to look real tough, but their quills aren't nearly as sharp as your hedgehogs are.
What kind of snakes did you say that you have now?
We got Western hognose.
Western hognose. Okay. What made you decide to get those?
So I tried to convince Alan for like 3 years that I wanted some sort of snake. And we got Kenyan Samboas at first. We just bought like a couple just to see how we liked them. And Alan was like, I don't like these. They have weird faces. So we decided not to get into like severely breeding those and stuff. And I showed him hognose multiple.
Aren't they?
What did you say?
Don't they hide all the time? Like, aren't
yeah,
they?
And they hide all the time. Like we didn't see them at all. They were in the sand and stuff, and we're like, yeah, like we want something that we kind of see and stuff. So the Western hognose, he didn't again like the face of them at first. He said, "Oh, those look weird," and I was like, "They look cute with their little upturned nose," and he said, "No, they look silly." And so I finally showed him one at a show, and he held it, and then he was like, "Oh, these aren't too bad." And I'm like, "Yeah, see, like I told you." And so we got one just as a pet for like, I don't know, we probably had him for over a year before we decided to, well, let's try to go. We bought the hognose breeding book and stuff and went through genetics to see what we would want to breed and stuff like that. And then we finally last year bred the hognose for the first time. Didn't have great results, but we changed to a different racking system and had a lot better results this year. So hopefully we'll have some little hognose babies.
So I'll be looking forward to that at the next at one of your shows. So that's great.
Yes.
So then let's go back and talk about the geckos. So you started with crested geckos, and then how did you get to 19 different types of geckos?
Well, I think Alan and I can both agree that we absolutely love geckos. Like, there's not really a gecko that I've seen that I've been like, oh no, I don't want this gecko. Like any gecko I ever see, I'm like, let's add it to the collection. So, we obviously started with the easier, like any of your New Caledonia stuff is pretty easy to maintain. Does your crested gecko diet and some insects, but are fairly low maintenance, not very fragile or anything like that. So that's what we started with. We kind of started with your crested gecko and we did gargoyles next, and then your Urodactylodes and your chihuahuas. And then it kind of exploded from there. We went to our first Tinley, and we were like, look, there's all these different geckos that we've never seen before. And so we talked to a couple different breeders and that year we got the Chinese cave geckos, we got our Adura manilis, Pictus geckos, fat tail gecko. I think we got like 5 or 6 species when we went to Tinley, and we were like, well, that escalated very quickly. Yeah. And then after that, it's kind of just been like quite a few of our species are very unique and very hard to find. Like we got Adura manilis at the Tinley show, and I got a trio, and they were just babies. And I grew them out, and they were all females. And then it took me 2 years to try to find another breeder that had that gecko to get a male. And so I finally got my little trio so that I could actually breed them. And then I found some other people who had them to try to diversify and stuff. But it was definitely any of the rarer geckos, it's a lot harder to try to get your pieces and get your males and females and all that stuff together. So
that's great. All right. So let's talk about your history with the reptile shows, and how did you decide that reptile shows was the way to go instead of other routes of selling?
At that point, Morph Market didn't exist. So that was a big deal because it was pretty much Craigslist and Facebook, and it was kind of not as good. And then at that time, we didn't have a website, so we didn't have any way to sell online. And obviously, we went to that Reptile Expo probably 10 or 15 times before we actually vended it. And we just did that one show for a full year before we were able to get into the Cleveland show, because the Cleveland show, the old venue, it was very hard to get
Mm-hmm.
a table. It took us another year to get like a permanent spot where Shay would let us have a show every single month.
Gotten into these two, and like when did you get your website?
Um, well, we got a, I'll say, a website in quotations like a year afterwards, but it was like a non, like, you couldn't buy anything off of it. It was more like to house our care sheets, and that was pretty much it. Care sheets and like about us type of thing.
Yeah.
Our website we finally got, yeah, our website we finally got going like, I think it's been 3 or 4 years. We went with Shopify and ended up designing it and everything, and now it has an actual e-commerce so that you could check out and buy everything, and I can post geckos there and sell them and take different payment methods, and so that actually really helped because it makes it a lot easier. And then again, all of our care guides and everything are on there so that if a customer's wondering about care, we can just send them right to the website and say, here's all of the stuff. If you have any questions after reading all of this, just let us know.
Oh,
So,
okay. So that's great. The different ways to sell things, and I personally noticed that I sold a lot more online versus at the show, but it was mostly people I'd met at the show that made a decision later and purchased them online for me. So it actually ended up being great both ways because I was able to take a limited number to the show, and I didn't expose all of my reptiles to the things. Because I always put my quarantine room after I take them to the show because I was concerned about getting different things. Although you take a lot of reptiles to the show, do you worry about having catching and anything? I mean, I don't know if New Caledonia geckos actually, or does any of your other stuff actually have things you could catch from others at the reptile show? Do you worry about that stuff, or?
I don't worry too much, but we make sure that no one puts anything on our table. So like if someone has an animal, we just tell them like, hey, please don't put that animal like on our physical table. And then anyone that has to, like, if they want to handle a reptile to see if they want to take it home, they're always using hand sanitizer beforehand. And then we actually, at all the shows we've been, we don't have any wild caught vendors around us. So our little island or whatever doesn't have any wild caughts. Actually, at the Columbus show, we're next to cages and the feeders, and then Cleveland, we're next to captive bred breeders that we know really well, and then Cincinnati, we're next to a wall and hognose breeders. So again, that we know really well. And
it's nice to have people that that you've been vending with each month, and you can trust them to bring good things and to tell you what's going on. And so tell us about your goals. What do you plan to do in the future, and what would be the ideal thing for you?
The ideal thing would be for Alan to quit his job. That's like pretty much the only goal we have right now, is to try to get to the point where he can leave his job, which is pretty much, we need to expand our reptiles more, which we're kind of in a growing pain stage where we bought our house in 2021, and so slowly we've had a ton of house issues, so a lot of money has been sunk into the house instead of reptile stuff. We slowly are upgrading enclosures, and so after we upgrade enclosures, we're going to buy a decent amount of extra enclosures, and then we can expand out and get some of the species that we want so that we can expand our collection and kind of stabilize some of our breeders and stuff like that. But obviously, upgrading cages is very expensive. It's like another $15,000 to finish upgrading all of our stuff. So that's our goal for hopefully this year / next year, is to finish upgrading so that we can expand reptile wise, because we've pretty much we've capped out on what I can make hard good wise. I make handmade products on Etsy for reptiles and stuff, and I can't physically make any more products than I'm making right now. So that's kind of capped out.
Have you found a way to get other people to make them for you, or it's just not the same?
I am a bit of a control freak. So I want to make sure the quality is as, as perfect as possible. And so even I've had Alan do the bridges, and then I'll see them and I'll be like, I'll just redo it myself. So until I find someone that I definitely like can do it and it looks consistent every single time, I think it'll just be something that I do. That way I have consistent quality, because you get a couple of bad reviews on Etsy and your store just tanks. So I'm like very hesitant of trying to find someone else to help me with it. So all of our reptile related products go on our website, but then I also sell on Etsy, because Etsy is essentially like Amazon for handcrafted items. So you don't have to do any marketing or anything. People are already coming to the platform and uh, typing in and searching like reptile bridges or reptile hides. So I don't have to do any work on that. Whereas the website, I have to bring people into the website. So it's a lot more work to get the people to the website. So at some point in time, I'd love not to do Etsy. Etsy takes about 15 to 20% of my sales, which is a pretty decent amount. But it's a lot, like I said, it's a lot easier. I don't have to work at, being on Facebook 100% of the time, or Instagram trying to post links and, doing all this stuff that I don't actually enjoy any of that stuff. So I think that's probably why I kind of take the easy way out and just let Etsy do it for me, so that I don't have to do all that marketing and stuff like that.
That's
So,
good. You got to let other people take care of your stuff, or you can't expand to a point. So,
yes.
are you at home now taking care of these pets, or do you have another job that you do?
No, I quit my job April of 2021. We pretty much got to the point where I was coming home from, so I was painting houses at the time. So I'd paint houses for 8 hours, and then I'd come home and work in the basement for 4 or 5 hours, and then eat real quick and then go to bed. So that was literally every day for almost 2 years. And we finally got to a breaking point. It was the biggest decision maker was we got approved for a house, and we bought a house, because I needed a consistent job in order to be able to buy a house, even though, we could afford it and stuff. The bank's like, yeah, no, we're not, you need a job. So after we bought the house and we felt like we were very comfortable, that's when I was like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. I'm so exhausted. And so handed my 2 weeks notice in, and it was a little terrifying at first. It was a little bit of growing pains, and not really realizing how different it would be to just be alone at home every day of the week. But now I'm just fine with it. I'm living the life of luxury.
So once again, about these reptile shows, do you plan? Do you go to three of them? Is that 3 weekends a month? Is that are they regularly every month?
Yeah, so all three of those shows are every month.
Mm-hmm.
So Columbus and Cleveland are usually the same weekend, and then Cincinnati's a different weekend. And we used to do Lexington. We used to do Rexpo. We did a show in Buffalo a couple of times. We did a show in Pittsburgh, but we pretty much decided to stick with those three shows. A lot of times those shows are 2 hours or less away from us. The other shows are 5 or 6 hours where you're needing a hotel because you just can't wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and neither of us are morning people. So
Because I thought a show should start at noon and go to 5 or 6 o'clock, because then the rest of us can sleep in while you're getting the show ready, and then we can go to the show and stay there later. There are no shows in the late afternoon. They all go from like 9 or 10 to 3, and so I know that's so people can get home. But I'm like, why can't I stay later? Why can't I go in later? So
yes, we have the next 3 weekends off. So which is like not very common. It's usually like a show and then a week off, and then a show and then a week off. So we happen to get 3 weekends off in a row, and I'm like, wow, I don't even know what to do with myself. Like I got these 3 weekends to like enjoy, and maybe I'll pull the weeds in the front yard.
Don't do
So
that. The neighbors will get used to that idea and they'll expect you to do it every week.
yes, exactly.
How about the New Caledonia species? What's your favorite?
The Chihuahuas are probably my favorite.
Mhm.
They're the most personable New Caledonia gecko we have. I love the Urodactylodes, but I wish they were bigger. Like I know that people are like, "Oh, they're so small and cute," but I'm like, "Yeah, but they're like, this big, and like I feel like I'm gonna squish you." And even the babies they come out of an egg the size of a Tic Tac, so they're teeny tiny and don't register on a gram scale. So you're like trying to pinch this little gecko and get it into its new habitat. So, like I said, I like the Uris, but they're just a little too small for me. Like I like them, but I love the Chihuahuas. They have a good size to them. They're usually not very quick. They kind of hang on to you. They're very personable. Like when I go out to feed, if I start shaking a cricket bag or come anywhere near them, they all come out of their little hollows and look at me and are like, "Is it time for food?" And get really excited and stuff. And yeah, they thrive very well. And then they're kind of really pretty. They have different colors and speckles on them and have that kind of wild type look to them. So I really like them. I think they're definitely my favorite out of all the New Caledonia geckos.
So, out of all of your geckos that you have, what are your favorite? What is your favorite?
So my favorite genus would be Aduras.
Mhm.
I own quite a few Aduras, which are Australian velvet geckos. We own Adura manilis, Castanawi, and Kagarai, and then we also own N robusta, which used to be classified as Adura, but no longer is. But I still like kind of think of it as an Adura. So
These darn scientists keep changing the rules and the groups and everything, and they keep using DNA and all other stuff. And we just want to look at them and say that they're the same way or they behave the same way, right?
oh yeah, yeah. So that group of geckos, they're just very unique. I see them a decent amount. There's a different. There's probably like 10 or 11 species of Aduras. I'm not exactly sure, but there's a ton of them. And they're all really cool, really colorful. And then they're about as handleable as your crested geckos. So they're not super fast, but they're not super slow. But I just love how much variety is there. They're super striking. Like the Kagarais are black and yellow, like a bumblebee, and the Castanawis are purple. And then we actually have the amelanistic version of the Castanawis, which are orange and white. And then the Manilis are black and have purple and yellow on them. So they just have some very pretty colors, and they're a small, medium-sized gecko. They're like 22 grams, so they're just little guys. And we got the Adura Manilis was the first one we got, and then after that, we slowly decided we wanted to get more of the genus because we loved them so much.
That's cool. So, if you had to pick out one reptile, and you could only own one reptile, assuming that it has to be legal in your state, I guess, what would it be?
Uh, I do not know because I think that's really hard
I guess
because
maybe one genus of reptiles. What
one
would it
genus, yes. If I did one genus, and then it would still be probably Aduras because there's so many of them. They're so pretty,
be?
and there's enough variety that I feel like I got like a decent amount of geckos. I think it's hard to just pick favorite. Like I said, like there's certain ones that I have that I like better than the others, but I love all of my geckos. I mean, there's so many other ones that I still want to get, and you know, but the Adura Manilis and the Aduras in general, I just really like them a lot. I think they're really cool geckos, and they're very underrated. They're very hard to find, and like I said, the Kagarais that we have, those are Adura Kagarais. We have 2 females, so at some point in time, we'll try to find a male, and those guys will breed, and But yeah, it's kind of fun also hunting them down and talking to different breeders and finding them and stuff because they're just a little bit more uncommon.
What
So
makes a perfect reptile show in the sense of for a vendor? What would be the perfect reptile show for you?
I think the perfect reptile show. Um, One would start later. I think they run too long too. So obviously we can run a report on Square, and we have been doing reptile shows since 2015. So you figure that's about 7 years of research
Mhm.
there on when peak times are. And pretty much 11 to 2 is your peak time, and the rest of the hours you might do some business. But 11 to 2 is when it's the busiest, and then you'll have some trickle in and the other thing. So it's hard, especially at the end. Some of our shows go to 4 o'clock,
Mhm.
and that last hour or two, you're just like, is it over yet? Can I go home?
So
Yeah.
start later and run shorter. What else could we do to make reptile shows more perfect?
Probably be more specific with the vendors that you go. I don't have a problem with wild caughts. Obviously, you have to bring in wild caughts to actually have. We got wild caught Kenyon Jackson, so I understand that. It's just I think that the hardest thing is you bring in wild caught vendors that do not care about the animals, and they're just trying to make a quick buck, and then they may turn off someone to reptiles for the rest of their life because they start out thinking, oh great, I'm getting this animal. Alan's coworker actually got a Pac-Man frog, and she was super excited about the Pac-Man frog, and as soon as she brought it over to our table, and as soon as we saw it, we're like, I'm so sorry, but this thing is not going to survive. But she didn't understand that. She thought, oh, I made this great purchase, and you're like, that thing is already sick. Like I can just tell looking at it that if it makes it, I will be very surprised. And so there are a lot of people that I'm sure that happens to, and obviously it's very sad when you lose an animal. And so if that's your first experience with reptiles, and your first experience is, oh, I got this animal and I let it down, and I pretty much, in their probably opinion, they probably failed to care for it. It's going to turn them off to where they might not ever want to buy a reptile again because they're worried they can't actually provide for it correctly, when actually they weren't, one, they probably weren't given the proper knowledge. So I do know that obviously you should research the animal before getting it, and all that. But obviously there are going to be impulse buys, um, and yeah. So if they get a sickly animal, it's very off-putting, and it's going to be a lot harder for that person to buy a good quality reptile in the future because they've kind of lost faith in themselves and in the industry because they bought a sickly animal to begin with.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate problem we see everywhere exist. I guess some of the shows are going to no wild caughts. I mean, and that means the breeders have to find wild caughts somewhere else, which is a good thing because we do need to continue our bloodlines and diversify. All right. Any last thoughts today?
Nope, I think we covered everything.
All right. Well, I very much thank you for being here. Please join our Facebook group, Reptile Show Reporter, pictured here. Thanks.